Next, the US has said it will, for the first time, formally establish diplomatic relations with the Pacific island nations of Niue and the Cook Islands. Well, this is a recognition that comes as President Joe Biden tries to strengthen relations in the Indo-Pacific region to counter, no surprise, China's rising influence, something that's been a major priority since he took office. So let's get a sense of what's going on. I'm joined by our international affairs editor, Philip Turle. Philip, what does it mean to establish diplomatic ties?
Well, first of all, let's just have a look at where these two islands are, because I'm sure many of you may not know or may never have heard of them. Niue and the Cook Islands are situated in the South Pacific, which is right the way down here, just east of Australia and northeast of New Zealand. This is a very strategically important area of the world, and much importance is put on it from both the United States and by the Chinese. Now, the reason that the US has granted diplomatic relations to both of these countries is because it wants to increase its diplomatic weight in the region as a result of what it sees as growing Chinese influence in the South Pacific. There is a meeting currently taking place of the Pacific Islands Forum that's gathering in Washington. There are 16 members of that. They include Australia, New Zealand, New Caledonia, Tonga, Papua New Guinea and Fiji and other island nations in the region. And the United States has already pledged 200 billion euros in aid, principally to help them fight against global warming and also improve their fishing rights and fight against illegal fishing in the region. All of this as a way of consolidating and increasing the US influence in the region and the US help towards those island nations face to face with what it sees as China's growing desire to increase its influence in the region. Now, the US has become so concerned about this, it sent even the Vice President Kamala Harris has been on a tour of the region recently, and more recently, Samantha Powers, the US agency from the US Agency for International Development, has been there. She has opened a new US aid office in Fiji to manage 9 Pacific Island countries. And embassies have also opened for the first time from the United States in the Solomon Islands and also Tonga. And even President Biden himself was due to visit the region for the first time, to go to Papua New Guinea for a visit there. That would be the first time ever, but that has had to been delayed due to financial problems back in the United States over the budget. So the US is definitely upping the ante in the face of what it sees as increased Chinese influence in the South Pacific.
You have to step back a second, Philip, here. Geopolitics, you've got the most powerful man in the world at a table with two leaders. On one side, the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands there, 8,000 people on the islands. The other, at Niue, 2,000 people. Suddenly it matters. Why? You were saying a little bit about China, but give us a sense of China's presence in that part of the world. Well,
China has two interests. The first one is security and the second one is defense. That is why it wants to increase its role in the South Pacific. Most of that influence has been from the United States up until fairly recently, within the last year or so. But China has decided that it now wants to increase its own influence in the South Pacific because it needs to fill out more of its obligations there to consolidate its own power, particularly over, for example, the argument over Taiwan and its sovereignty. So what it wants to do is to increase aid to nations in the South Pacific, development, diplomacy, security cooperation. And just recently, last year, there was a security pact signed by the Chinese with the Solomon Islands, which I think has certainly put the pressure on the United States and acted as a wake-up call, thinking, well, maybe the next step by the Chinese would be to establish a military base on the Solomon Islands. And that's why we've seen this flurry of diplomatic activity on the part of the United States to try to combat what it sees as possibly trying to take over that US influence in the region. And that is why I think we've suddenly seen, for example, this desire by Joe Biden to go there personally to try to strengthen those relations. A bit like, for example, the increased role that China is playing in Africa and many West African nations. And that is also seen by some as trying to strengthen its influence in many developing world nations around the globe right now.
In the midst of all this, meeting with two minnows, I guess, of countries, but you talk about the influence of that region. Are Beijing saying anything?
Yes, there's been rather an angry reaction so far from the Chinese. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said that Beijing is going to, and I'll quote, oppose what it calls the wanton expansion of military alliances in the South Pacific. We're not basically talking particularly about military alliances here. It's more about diplomatic and economic cooperation with these nations, but to try to offset the influence of China at the same time. Australia is now the biggest investor in the South Pacific, having overtaken China, which has cut back on some of its investment in that area. We may see another Chinese effort to try to increase that. There is the 21-member Asia-Pacific Economic Council Summit, which is planned to take place in November in San Francisco. The big question now is, will the Chinese President Xi Jinping be there? And if he does go to this meeting, 21-country meeting, will he be meeting with Joe Biden, the US President, for a one-on-one? That is something for the moment we can't say, but with all the activity going on there, that meeting may have much more strategic importance than maybe it would have done a year or so ago.
No, we'll keep across that. Philip Turle, our Foreign Affairs editor, thank you.